Russell in the pocket. Russell for Curse, and that's broken up again. And is it? But somehow, did he wind up with a football? So he breaks up the play. But at the end of the day, look at that.
For every single person who tuned into this game, it's déjà vu. The helmet catch flashed into everyone's mind, and the outcome was seemingly inevitable. A slow and painful realization for Belichick, Brady, and every Patriots fan in existence. They gotta try and stop the most unstoppable running back that I've ever seen. Not once, but 4 times in a row. Good luck. On first down, they barely stop him. He was so close to getting into the end zone. The Seahawks had put up nearly 400 yards in that game. They just needed one more yard to solidify themselves as a dynasty.
Now you have to stop Marshawn Lynch. Lynch in the backfield. Russell looks, throws inside. Oh my God! It's picked off at the goal line. It's picked off by Butler. Intended for Lockett at the goal line. Oh my word! With 20 seconds left.
I don't know what's more obvious, the fact that Seattle should have ran the ball, or the fact that you should be using SeatGeek anytime you're looking to buy tickets. From sports to comedy events and concerts, SeatGeek puts tickets from all across the web into one area and puts them on a 1 to 100 scale, so you know you're getting a good deal. If you haven't used the app yet, use my promo code KTO for $20 off your first purchase. I gotta thank SeatGeek for sponsoring this video. And now, let's get back to the team at question. The Seahawks. That interception in the Super Bowl single-handedly ruined them. This was the breaking point that led to the eventual collapse that was the Legion of Boom. The Legion of Boom thrived off of attitude, but Seattle had a history of issues within the team, and following the loss in the Super Bowl, this locker room problem would escalate. A year before the fatal Malcolm Butler interception, they were fresh off of winning it all the previous season. There was an early summer practice where things got heated. Sherman picked off Wilson in practice, and this is what took place. According to witnesses, Sherman threw the ball back at Wilson and yelled, "You effing suck." Another fight broke out. Sherman was cussing and yelling. Wilson seemed stunned. Pete Carroll stopped practice and would later hold a series of meetings to remind the players they need to build each other up, not tear each other down, and that they needed to support their quarterback, further pissing off a defense that already thought the head coach went out of his way to protect him. Look, attitude happens when a team comes together as one, completely buying into a coach's message. These players were completely bought in until that play. If you don't think that one play can throw everything out of whack, listen to this. Many of the core players have criticized Carroll for years. This snippet from the New York Post said that, quote, Averill is not the first ex-Seahawk to criticize Carroll this offseason, as both Sherman and Bennett have taken shots at their former coach. Sherman accused Carroll of, quote, devaluing core players, and Bennett suggested Carroll was redundant and easy to tune out. I do think the team would have bought in more to what Coach Carroll was saying instead of going the opposite way of, this is what we thought the foundation of the team was. And that's not what happened on this particular play. So I think guys started questioning him more so than actually following his lead if we had won that Super Bowl. Trust me on this. When your coach becomes redundant and easy to tune out and gets away from what made you a great team, you lose that critical connection between the two. Seattle fell into a bit of a panic mode following the Super Bowl. Just barely a month had passed before they traded away their 2-time Pro Bowl center and their upcoming first-round pick for Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham is a complete freak, and at the time, this seemed like a solid move to give this offense a reliable red zone threat. But let me show you how the Seahawks were built. Best defense in the league. They don't force a lot of turnovers, but you can't move the ball on them, let alone trying to put up a bunch of points. They complement this with the #1 rush attack in the NFL, and they dominate time of possession, especially based on the length of their average drive. This strategy is undeniably successful, and it's the reason that this team became so devastating. Now, let me tell you about that Jimmy Graham trade again. Seattle gave up their centerpiece on their O-line and burned a first-round pick for a non-blocking tight end with a massive contract and coming off his worst season since his rookie year. I know it's a little bit of hindsight, but if this front office sticks to how they built this team organically through the draft, sleeper picks, overlooked talent, they could have kept building onto what they had already established. Instead, we saw an offense quickly turn into one of the league's worst. By 2016, running behind a shallow, injury-prone offensive line, Marshawn Lynch had his worst yards per carry average since the year that he was traded to Seattle. Dealing with that, along with getting injured, was enough for Marshawn to realize what was going on here. Just 2 years after being arguably the best running back in the league, he called it quits. He decided to announce his retirement the day of Super Bowl 50. Eventually, other players have retired, most recently Cam Chancellor. Others have been on the trade block, and most of them have just left altogether.
The royalty of college football is in assembly at the Rose Bowl 2006.
History just seems to repeat itself. On January 4th, 2006, USC had the chance to cement themselves as the first legitimate powerhouse of the 21st century. They had won it the year before, also tied for the title in 2003. This means that they could have won their third title in a row.
He's going for the corner. He's got it.
After losing to Texas, Pete Carroll and USC would fall into utter chaos, spiraling downwards until Pete Carroll left in January 2010, 4 years later. This is a prediction based on history. If Pete Carroll resigns or is fired around February of 2019, not only will Malcolm Butler and Vince Young be sipping tea together, but Déjà Vu will have brutally run its course. There are two sides to this what if that need to be talked about. Let's start with Malcolm Butler. His life changed because of one play. Want me to prove it? He entered Super Bowl 48 as the 5th string cornerback. He only had one start that entire season and hadn't exactly proven himself. I read an article discussing the build-up to Butler's incredible interception. During practice that week, they had practiced against that very play, but Butler failed to stop it. The article mentions the Patriots weren't even sure who they'd play in that situation. The reps were split between 3 dudes. Butler was only in the Super Bowl because Kyle Arrington had played poorly in the first half. That play in the Super Bowl was enough confirmation of Belichick to dump the 3 other corners in favor of Butler. Now, if we say that Seattle ran the ball, Malcolm Butler would be remembered as the unlucky guy who this happened to. It's possible that he would even go to his role as backup cornerback. To be honest, Belichick has an eye for talent, and Butler would still most likely be good. Eventually, at worst, he may never go to the Pro Bowl. But this is what you're here for. The biggest what if that stems from this entire scenario. What would have happened to the Seahawks if they had just ran the ball? The Seahawks settle into the offseason as back-to-back Super Bowl champions. It's the 2015 NFL Draft. Now, just a little different. Originally, Seattle sent off their starting center and first-round pick for Jimmy Graham. In our updated situation, I'm going to go with the old phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They just won their second Super Bowl on the legs of game's MVP, Marshawn Lynch. They know they don't need to further decimate this offensive line. So based on team needs and what mock draft said that they would have done before the trade, they add tight end Charles Clay in the offseason. A lesser version of Jimmy Graham, but this is still an effective option, and now they have their starting center back and their first round selection. And with that pick, they would now take an offensive guard, which the highest rated one left was Mitch Morse. He will develop into an excellent run blocker and eventually make the move to center when Max Unger retires. With these simple changes, Seattle now has the best defense in football, and their offense is even better. This is the season that Beastmode suffered a midseason injury and missed extended time. But based on how they rallied without him, if he gets hurt, I think they're still fine, and they make the playoffs anyway. They win 2 more games than they originally did, which now has them taking the division and swapping places with the Cardinals, meaning that this never happens. Ultimately, nearing the end of the 2015-2016 season, Denver still goes on to beat New England in the AFC Championship, and on the NFC side of things, instead of Seattle playing the Panthers in the divisional matchup, they now meet in the NFC Championship. Remember how bad Seattle played in that playoff game and almost came back? This time, they don't start nearly as poorly, and with a stronger roster and beast mode healthy, they advance to their third straight Super Bowl. Super Bowl 50, the rematch. Things look a little bit different than when these two faced off 2 years prior. Instead of having a record-setting offense, the Broncos now have a tenacious defense, meanwhile dealing with a gimpy-armed Peyton Manning. Although the Super Bowl is much closer than the previous game, it doesn't matter. In a low-scoring defensive battle, the Seahawks three-peat. This is the first time this has ever happened in NFL history. Just naturally based on how this team was built, it would have slowly began to fade. But at that point, it wouldn't have mattered. They could have been in consideration for one of the greatest teams ever, but when we take a look at reality, instead of remembering how good this team once was, we will always remember them as the team who failed to win back-to-back Super Bowls. They have become the ultimate example of showing how one play can ruin everything. Not just the fact that they lost that Super Bowl, but the decision to pass was so catastrophic. It began a max exodus out of Seattle for many players, and it's ultimately just a matter of time before the next man who's on his way out is the man who made that ill-fated decision in the first place.
You are on the 1 yard line, and you have number 24, and you drop back pass. Are you kidding me?
Just a shot to the heart of every Seahawks fan.